Hello, we're live. Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. I'm trying to just quickly finish up my sandwich, and I am alone today. Unfortunately, Olivia is not feeling well. Hopefully, she feels better soon. Um, I'm only now realizing that when it's just me, it's going to be pretty hard to finish a sandwich. So there's no one else to talk. Um, yes, this is not therapy hour. I'm Brandon Testers, and I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very, very many reasons. What this is just an open conversation online, me and you, whoever you are, and I will be doing my best to make my guesses about who you are and what you're interested in, what you're interpreting from what I'm saying, and how I'm impacting you. Uh, and for those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat, I very much appreciate that, especially on days like today where I'm flying solo, because it helps me to have more information on which to base my guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and how I'm coming across to you and impacting you. Um, I'll be talking about whatever I'm talking about. Jump in at any point. Please don't feel like you need to hesitate or wait, or don't worry about whether you're interrupting or taking things off track. I actively encourage, I want to be interrupted. I want to be taken off track. I don't think of it as being taken off track, but the thing that people think of as going down rabbit holes or off on side tangents, I want that to happen. Me, I just keep growing. Hi, Dad. How's it going? Um, yeah, this is a conversation like any other. Things that I'm saying will impact you. The things that you say impact me. And we go where we go. I work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the state of Illinois and people in the state of Wisconsin. We also work with a few executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. And also I can't believe I didn't think to mention this before, but we are also, we'll be doing some group like workshops and things like that are not group therapy, but are accessible to people all over the world, including one that Olivia is doing with Caitlin Miller, who used to be on the stream quite a bit. If any of you have been around that long, you remember. The two of them are doing a workshop together that is open to people. It's not therapy. It's a online workshop, so it's open to people all over. And this is going to be the first time they're running it. And as we often do when we do something for the first time, they are not charging anybody to be a part of this initial group. So if you're interested, it's I'm going to probably misrepresent it, but sorry, one moment. Let me stop my tea water from boiling. It's an identity exploration and goal setting workshop focused around using the major arcana of the tarot as like ways to facilitate identity and goal exploration. I don't know what that means, the major arcana of, I think it's like a certain subset of tarot cards that count as the major arcana. But very cool. And if that's something you're interested in, please reach out. Honestly, it might already be full because it is free. In the future, we'll run it again, but this is the only time it'll be that. I'm keen on harnessing the mind to exceed physical limitations. Oh man, ain't we all? Last thing I'll say too, coming on board, is that I'll do what I've just done a couple of times here, which is read out the comments, because we stream on 3 different platforms simultaneously. You'll only see chat comments from people who are on the same site that you're streaming on. So if you're on Facebook, you won't see the Twitch comments and etc. So I try to read them out so that everybody's on the same page. I'm keen on harnessing the mind to exceed physical limitations. Great, let's talk about that. In fact, I was just writing a little bit about this. Say more, I guess, but while I'm waiting for you to say more, I can say there is a window, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a tiny, tiny little window, right? But we all know that there's a window of like, here are physical limitations that cannot be exceeded, no matter how you think about things, no matter how strong your willpower or your desire. You cannot make yourself like fly through the air. You can't make your body become 3 feet taller overnight or at all or whatever, unless you're a child growing up. Right. That there's this stuff that we all understand. Like, here's a physical limitation that cannot be exceeded. That's just not possible. And then there's this small window right below that where it's like, here's things that are technically possible for my body to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do it no matter what I think. But I'm having a hard time getting myself to do, or it's painful or difficult to do, or whatever. And that's where we have some ability to think about things in a way that makes it so that we can change what would otherwise be happening. So something that I think a piece of language that'll be useful to put out there is how I like to use the word habit. I know that, as with all language, it means whatever it means when people are using it. So this isn't about this is the correct usage or other people are using it incorrectly. But what I like to use when I say habit, what I'm trying to mean by that is your unconsidered response to stimuli. Meaning, at any point, your body is doing something. When you're asleep, unconscious, your body is doing something. It breathes in and it breathes out, and cells are doing things, and the digestive system and the heart is pumping, and etc. Right? So, obviously, we don't pay a lot of attention to those kinds of things because they're happening almost all the time. We pay a lot of attention when they're not happening, but otherwise, not really drawing our attention. So we tend to focus on the stuff that's more in that window where it's like, if I consciously exert some influence, then I'll do this thing. And if I don't, then I won't. And so when people are talking about like, what did you do yesterday? Oh, I didn't do anything. They're talking about things that we've conceptually identified as like, I did the dishes or whatever. But we're leaving that aside for now. And we're saying your body always responds to what is happening. It doesn't always respond to what is happening in the optimal way. It doesn't always respond in beneficial ways. Sometimes the way it responds is bad. Sometimes it's even fatal. That happens. People die. But it's always responding. So if your body responds to whatever stimuli, and stimuli are specific to the moment, right? In the moment, whatever is happening, and my body does what it does. If there's no thought involved in that, that's an unconsidered, meaning there's no consideration, no thought about how should I respond or what should I do. It just happens, an unconsidered response to the stimuli. We can also call that a habitual response or habit. The first time I bench pressed 4 plates, 405 pounds, my brain said it won't move. Or if it will move, it will crash through the protection and kill you. After attempting and succeeding, the brain said, I bet we can do 500 pounds body. And it was actually easier because the brain was on board. Interesting. Yeah, this is generally what people are talking about is like, there's something where I have a thought that I can't do it or shouldn't do it or it would be bad. And then I change my thought to I can do it or I should do it or it will be good. And now I do it. So that's not about actually overcoming your physical limitations, right? And I know that I'm parsing things very closely. You can say I'm being persnickety or whatever, but there's a reason that I'm doing this, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about that as we go along. That was not a physical limitation, right? You're not talking about something you couldn't do before and then could do after. You're talking about something that was more difficult before and then easier after. B, you're talking about changing the way you think about it from this will be bad, which makes something scary, or, it makes us more hesitant to do something, or maybe unwilling to do it at all, or unwilling might not even be the right word. It's if something is going to kill me, I shouldn't do it, right? So if I think something is going to kill me, then I'm not going to do it. And then switching that thought to, no, I think it will be good for me. And that's like we're talking about a very narrow window of stuff. That wasn't a physical limitation, theoretically. You could have always done it. It was just about changing your belief about whether or not it was a good thing to do. So it helps to separate things into 2 categories. There's ideation and there's execution. Thinking is all ideation stuff, coming up with ideas about what would be worth doing or what will happen if we do this or don't do this or how it will go and whatever. Execution is the actual doing of it. In order to solve a problem, in order to accomplish something, anything, you have to have both an idea of what could be done to solve the problem, and then you have to execute the idea. It's really useful, I would say important, to separate those two things as two separate stages. Because in terms of physical limitations, you always had the ability to execute. It was the idea about whether you could or whether it would be a good idea that shifted. Now, I will point out, and this also is going to sound persnickety, the brain is part of the body. Maybe I'll try and make an effort to allow people to tell me if they think that I'm being like overly pedantic or nitpicky rather than just anticipating it, because I don't know, maybe you're not responding or thinking of it that way. But for most people, brain and mind, for me until not that many years ago, brain and mind are interchangeable words. The brain and the mind are the same thing, and they are not. And it's very useful to separate that out. Again, this isn't about what is correct. Everybody uses brain in that way, and that's fine. I'm offering this different way of using it, or this more specific and precise way of interacting with this language, because I believe that it will be helpful, or at least potentially helpful, with the things that you're asking about. The brain is part of the body. It is an organ, like the heart, like the liver, it's part of the body. The mind is the term we use to encapsulate your conscious experience, the part of you that is you, the part that is not there when you are unconscious and asleep, right? Your body still exists, your brain still exists. In fact, your brain is still doing stuff. There's still electrical activity running through your brain and all of your nervous system when you're asleep, but the consciousness is gone. So we're talking about the mind. Partly because it can be very useful in some places to anthropomorphize the brain, talk about the brain as though it is a thing that has its own will and desires and ideas. And in other places, it's really unhelpful or even problematic to think of it that way. Now, this isn't about whether this is a good time or, a useful or unuseful time to think of it that way, just something to help clarify. The brain is part of the body. If you're talking about wanting to overcome physical limitations and you're saying that it's your brain saying this, then it would be a physical limitation. Your brain, part of your body, is preventing you from doing it. That leads down a path that's like really philosophical, and I'm not sure worth like delving into the specific details of, but here's one. The brain is part of the nervous system. In the same way that the heart is part of the cardiovascular system. The things that people generally, when they're saying my brain this, my brain that, what we're talking about is our consciousness. And even in thinking, if you were to ask, like, what do you mean your brain is whatever? People would say, like electrical signals this or neurotransmitters that. All that stuff actually takes place in the entire nervous system. It's a distributed network, including some very fascinating research, especially recently, on what's called the gut-brain axis, that you have neurons in your intestines and that there are receptors for neurotransmitters in your intestines, and that if you have certain kinds of bacteria in your gut and they eat a certain kind of chemical and then produce a certain kind of waste byproduct, those receptors then detect that and trigger fight or flight, or trigger the opposite, what we call rest and digest. It's a distributed network. It's not all in your brain. Just like not all of your blood is in your heart. Without the heart, the rest of it doesn't work. Whereas other parts are peripheral, and if you lose it, that portion of it doesn't work, but the rest of the system can work. The heart is the central part, and without it, it can't work. Same with the brain. You can lose nerves, and that part of it doesn't work, but the rest of the system. But if you lose the brain, that's the central, it's all gone. Not to be persnickety, but even though I could do it, as evidenced by the accomplishment, but I literally couldn't do it until my mind opened up and said, okay, maybe it's possible, let's try it. So this is fun, but maybe, I don't know, very philosophical. This is where we need to talk about could and couldn't versus can and can't. Could, potential, capability, all of these ideas are all these concepts are stories, right? We're creating narratives about what we think would happen, not what is happening or isn't happening. So it is true to say, like, for example, if I were to say, like, I can't lift this much weight, and then I do, it was still true in the moment before that I couldn't because I wasn't, even if what we're saying then is the reason I can't is because I am not willing to try, or I am not engaging my body in a certain way in order to do it, or whatever. The reason behind why you can or can't is a separate exploration from can you or can't you. As a general rule, potential and capability, potential especially, are concepts that are going to cause you problems more than they're going to help. If you think, I'll say the thing I always say, capability is neither static nor binary. If I say, are you capable of eating a burrito? Could you eat a burrito? Can you eat a burrito? Say yes. If I say, are you capable of eating a burrito when you just ate 7 other burritos in the previous 15 minutes? Likely no. So what you're capable of changes based on the context. And it's not a binary thing of you can or you can't. Every successive burrito got harder and harder and harder and harder to eat. Just like, okay, I can lift 500 pounds or whatever. Well, every time you do that, the next time it's harder and harder, and then eventually you can't do it. But then you rest and you can do it again. This is a constantly shifting thing. What you're talking about, generally we apply the language of that, we're calling that initiation. Under executive functioning, we can divide that up in different ways, like what are the things we're calling executive functioning. And executive functioning generally is talked about as like the way that resources are allocated. That's not what it technically is, but that's how we usually are talking about it. In other words, if one day you decide to like fly through the air and you jump when you try and it works, then you'll say, well, I just never could before because I didn't think I could. What's really happening is we have finite resources, limited things, right? There's only so much of a body that we have. There's literally so much energy that we have, so much ability to pay attention or be aware of things. And we're allocating those resources. And that's done non-consciously. Like even what we notice is where our attention is allocated is one of the things that is determined, it's a finite thing and has to be determined where things go. Because that one is what we even notice in the first place. How could we consciously determine it, right? So I like to sometimes call them algorithms or sometimes processes. You've got these algorithms, these processes running under the surface, under the hood. You can't observe them directly. You can only observe the outputs of them. But theoretically, one of the things that they're trying to do is figure out what is worth spending our resources on. If those processes output that like something will go poorly or something will be a waste of your resources. So in this case, if those processes determine that trying to bench press 400 pounds will result in injury or death, or if it just determines like I won't accomplish the thing and therefore it would be a waste of resources, then I'm not going to do the thing. In fact, I'm unlikely to even notice it, be aware of it, think about it at all. At any given moment, there are untold, literally infinite number of things that you theoretically are like not thinking about, because if you were to think about it, you'd reach the conclusion that that's not possible or it's not worth doing or not valuable or would make things worse. Well, okay, what just popped in my mind is a bit of a side note, but I'm going to put it out there anyway right now. Sometimes those thoughts do pop up, just to be clear, and that can cause people distress when they misunderstand this process. Meaning, one of the things that I'm not going to really think about generally, because if I do, the logical conclusion of this chain of logic is that it would be bad to do it. So I don't think about it, is I could walk into traffic, right? When I think about it, okay, I think about doing that. Nope, I don't want to do that. That would be a bad thing to do. So most of the time I don't think about it at all. But what we're talking about right here is what happens from time to time, throughout a person's life. I mean, not trying to make it sound rare. It happens all the time where we think about something that we hadn't thought about before and they're like, oh, I guess I could just do this. And we think through that, and then we reach the conclusion at the end of like, oh no, that would be good to do, and we do it, and it is good. Point is, it is worth, when we have the resources spare, the resources available, it is worth us having some of these thoughts, these possibilities that we just don't, I shouldn't call them thoughts, some of these possibilities that we don't think of. It is worth bringing them up to consciousness and exploring the logic and imagining what might happen, just to either reaffirm like, yep, that is one that is worth not thinking about, or to say, oh, actually, this one might be worth thinking about more, or might even be worth doing. So sometimes those things come up and it's like, what if I swerved into oncoming traffic? Or what if I knocked all the stuff off of this grocery shelf right here? Or what if I said that really mean thing to that person? If, when you think about it, you come to the conclusion like, no, I don't think that would be, I wouldn't like to do that, I wouldn't like the outcome of that, or whatever, then that means you don't want to do it. And people sometimes get confused and think that having the thought in the first place means that you want to do it. It does not mean that. It just means that for whatever reason, your processes have determined this is worth checking and thinking about so that we can come to a conclusion about whether we want to do it or not. So back to this. I am careful to use different terms like processes and algorithms, and I said non-conscious rather than subconscious, not because subconscious is a bad term, but because it carries certain implications. What we know, all of us, is that there's something going on internally that we don't observe, that we can't observe, and that nobody else observes either, but that does impact things that we do observe, like our own thoughts and feelings are things that each of us personally we can know, we see, we're aware of our thoughts, and we're aware of the things that we feel. Other people and we ourselves can observe our physical actions, our behavior. But there's something in between, and everybody knows this, because I don't have a thought about doing anything, and then I do. And it's like, well, wait, I didn't consciously decide not to have that thought before, and I didn't consciously decide to have that thought at that point. So what just happened there? So there's this stuff, and we can call it different things. Executive functioning is one of the terms for that. In some cases, people use executive functioning only to refer to the unobservable stuff that impacts execution, like between having a thought and then the body doing something. But in other cases, we're talking about it on the other side too, about like what we even notice in the first place, what comes into consciousness. Why am I dissatisfied with what I can do? Yeah, big deal. Versus being motivated to chase what I can't do, even to the level of superhuman. I am giggling. Don't tell my rodeo buddies that I use the word giggling as I type the word superhuman. Yes, okay. I'll try and be less precise and a little more like accessible right now. There is a belief in our culture, it might be in other cultures or even in all cultures, I don't know, but I know it's in ours, that if a person wants something, that's the same as a person doing something, and vice versa. Doing something is the same as wanting something. If you do something, it means you wanted to. If you don't do something, it means you didn't want to. That is not true, not even remotely true, but it is encoded in the way that we think. And then the way that we think impacts how we feel and how we act. Just like how we act impacts how we think and how we feel, and how we feel impacts how we think and what we do. So, we think, therefore, that like, if I am to think about flying through the air and reach the conclusion that that is not possible, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I even thinking about that? Because we're thinking, oh, if I think about it, that sounds cool. I'd like to do that, but I can't. And it runs up against this idea that like, if I want something, it should happen. It exposes the myth, basically. Anytime that you want to do something and you don't, and anytime that you don't want to do something and you do, those expose this myth. Well, they expose it as a myth, I guess, right? It's we generally are talking about both in therapy and executive functioning coaching in this stream specifically because of neurodiversity and neurodivergence and like the kinds of things we talk about and the kinds of people who are likely to come here and what things we're discussing. We tend to think about this idea that if I want to do something, I'll do it. We tend to think of it as like a bad, crappy thing, that we think that because we just feel bad and other people make us feel bad about not doing something, and that means that we don't want it and whatever. And that is one of the outcomes of it. The part we're generally not talking about on this stream or in these spaces, therapy spaces and whatever generally, is it's a really nice thought. We wouldn't all encode it so deeply if it wasn't a nice thought. And by nice thought, I mean it is a pleasant thought. I also mean it is a valuable and useful thought. It is not accurate. That doesn't mean that it is not useful. And when we identify that it isn't accurate, people then sometimes try to throw the baby out with the bathwater a bit. No thought that you have is like true. No belief that you have is true. That's not how thinking works. But some are useful. If you use the useful ones in the ways that are useful, that's great. Sometimes you use one that's useful in some context, in a different context where it isn't useful or even makes things worse. And that's not great, that's bad. But that doesn't mean it's not still useful in the other way. In other words, how would you find out what can be done if you didn't sometimes try things that you don't know if you can do them or not? It's another one of these things. This often gets talked about in our culture as like people who think, well, if I don't try, I can't fail. Or like, if I fail, I can always say, I didn't really try that hard, but if I try my hardest, then I have to. And there's some truth to that. We don't like to acknowledge our limitations. It's not fun, in large part because we know that like the major scope of these limitations is mortality. We will die someday. We will be unable to make ourselves live no matter how much we want to at some point. I guess I should say theoretically, but at some point we're very confident that will happen. So anytime that if we think about that and if we connect our current experiences to future experiences and these other cultural things, we identify characteristics that make a person successful or unsuccessful or whatever, then anytime we want to do something and we don't, we connect that to this larger thing of like, does that mean I'm the kind of person that fails at stuff and that I will, whenever I want something, it won't happen, or whenever I want to avoid something, it'll happen anyway. So we do this thing of trying to evaluate, like, before I try something, I want to be really sure that it will work, which is, I can say relatively unequivocally, the wrong way to be going about thinking about this. What we want to be thinking about is, before I try something, how confident am I that like things won't be worse if I try this? Meaning, before trying to like leap across a gap, it's obviously pretty valuable and important to think about, like, is this likely to work? Because if not, I could fall and get hurt or maybe even die. But what we're evaluating there is the chance, the stakes, right? That if it goes poorly, how bad would that be? If the stakes of failure are, I'm no worse off than when I started, then you should try it. And that's technically never the case, because always at the very least you'll have fewer resources, whatever resources you used in the attempt. But that's a much different stakes to evaluate. Like, is it worth trying this? Instead of, will I succeed at this? What you're referring to there when you're saying my brain says I can't lift this or whatever is that kind of subroutine where it's like, don't try something that isn't going to work. And we want to shift that to, don't try something that has a chance of causing pain and problems for you. Major diversion, but how does one train the mind to say, I like where I'm at, and simply be satisfied? Being satisfied feels like preparing for death, overly dramatic. I know, perhaps it's a function of aging. No, actually, well, I mean, I guess we could say it's dramatic, but it's very common. Even people who don't think about it in these terms are likely dealing with this to some extent. Here's a fun little, one of my staff lately has been saying, nothing is real, everything is made up, which is a bit of an exaggeration, I think, but I like it a lot because it's a point I'm trying to make a lot, is that whatever real is outside of you, outside of me. My thoughts, my perceptions, whatever is a map of reality. It's not the same thing as what reality is. So I like to point out some stuff, like think about a time in your life when you were happy, and now go back to that experience and tell me what you were thinking in the moment in which you were happy. And you can't. Maybe you can if you define these words, if you're interpreting these words differently than typically people do. But for the most part, you can't, because you're not thinking when you're happy. Everybody is fairly clear on that, right? Talking about wanting to be out of your head or present in the moment or whatever. The best metaphor I have is that thinking is like holding something. You're exerting resources in order to do it. Now, there are some things that holding, it's going to hurt right away from holding it, even though you can do it for some period of time. Some things you can do for a long time, but it'll hurt, the whole time or whatever. But sometimes you're holding something and it doesn't register to you as like something I don't want to do or whatever, because I'm focused on, in this case, I'm using the example of drinking my tea. And I do want to drink my tea. So I don't think of it as holding my tea mug. I think of it as taking a drink of tea, if I think of it at all. As soon as I think about it as holding my tea mug, then I might start to notice, oh no, my muscle is engaged, right? In other words, when you're holding something in your hand, for the most part, and this is the hope with thinking too, that when you're thinking or when you're holding something in your hand, for the most part, it's a very low cost thing. It's not like going to cause you any kind of problems to hold it for the moments or for the length of time that you're holding it. And it's very useful or even necessary in order to be able to do something enjoyable or important, right? So thinking about stuff can be enjoyable in the same way that holding stuff can be enjoyable, not because the act itself is enjoyable, but because it's part of or it enables the thing that is enjoyable. But in either case, there is an undercurrent. You don't necessarily think of it, but there's always going to be an undercurrent of wanting to stop doing it, right? I can't do this forever. I can do it just fine and drink my tea and enjoy it. But if you tell me I had to hold it, even the other way, hold it like this for an hour without moving it, even just with that short period of time, I'd be like, oh no, that's going to get real rough at some point, right? Same thing with thinking. If you're thinking about something for a little bit and it's useful to think about it, it's resulting in fun and whatever, then great. But even fun and useful stuff to think, if you had to think it for some long period, eventually you're going to get exhausted and it's going to be difficult and you want to set it down. The point of holding something is to do whatever needs to be done so that you no longer have to hold it. The point of thinking about something is to do whatever needs to be done so that you no longer have to think about it. In either case, like happiness is not actually a word that we generally associate, even though people think of it as an emotion. When you do a body scan or whatever, or ask people about the physical sensations associated with the emotional experience of happiness, we're talking about joy or pleasure or excitement or these other things. Happiness is a larger concept. In fact, originally it means closer to lucky. Same root words as like what's happening, what happens. It's happy means the things which are happening in my life are things that I like. Apologies for the hack, but is this a question of being present but still allowing movement forward from the present? Oh boy. See, I want to talk about that in like that kind of philosophical language, but there is not a way, I guess I'll say in practical terms, to avoid some edge cases or whatever that people might be able to think of. In practical terms, there's not a way to think and be satisfied. Thinking is a thing that you do in order to help you get to a point where you're satisfied. And The same way that lifting a cup of tea is something that I do in order to get to a point where I'm satisfied. But if I was satisfied, I wouldn't be expending those resources to do it in the first place. By definition, that's what it means to be satisfied. Again, this goes to that same underlying idea of thinking about something is the same as wanting it, and wanting something is the same as it happens. In other words, I can look at something, I can consider something and think about ways where I would like it to be different without that meaning that I dislike what it currently is. Those two things don't have to be the same. This is a real example for me, sometimes, not all the time, something I'm continuing to work on. I can want my body to be shaped differently or to appear differently or to feel differently, and also think that the way my body is shaped or the way it appears or the way that it feels is good and I like it, and I still want it to be better anyway. So this idea that one should be satisfied with life, there's a reason that you're thinking about it as preparing for death. Stagnation, right? Like the idea that you should be satisfied with the way things are. If a person was satisfied with the way things are, they would literally not exert resources. And that's not really possible, because even if you sat there for a moment, pretty quickly, like you're going to get hungry or need to use the bathroom, or you're uncomfortable and you shift the way that you're sitting, right? There's not a thing about being satisfied with the way things are in some large scale, long-term kind of way. You can have moments of it, and then it's not. Which, if that sounds sad to you or depressing or bleak, then that's not about what reality is, because I'm just saying what's real. That's about your concept of what reality is supposed to be, and being upset about the fact that what is real is different than what you think it should be. Being satisfied is not an inherently good thing. Being hungry is not an inherently bad thing. It's an unpleasant experience. It is a valuable thing. We generate that, right? Our body, our nervous system, our mind, our non-conscious processes, we generate the feeling that we call hunger. We generate the feeling that we call pain. That doesn't mean that it is uncorrelated from reality. If I get stabbed in the leg, it hurts. It hurts because I got stabbed. But my body is still the thing that is generating that signal of pain. It's a good thing that it is generating that signal. It is worth spending resources to generate that signal in response to what happened, because it draws my attention to what happened and makes it so that I address that thing. I'm listening, but my skill of listening is an intermediate skill. Actually, this is one of the reasons that I'll constantly say things like, it doesn't matter if you hear and understand everything that I'm saying. We overemphasize consciousness in everything. We think that everything we do is something we consciously choose to do or not do. And if that's the case, then yes, anytime I do something that I didn't want to do, I'm like, whoa, I got to think differently. And that also applies to this here, that you're thinking, and I appreciate this, I value this in the way that people generally perceive me, is that I am perceived as the things that I'm saying, well, it would be helpful, would be useful, are valuable. So if I just hear and understand everything that guy's saying, and then I can know that stuff and I can make myself do those things, and things will be better. But we change for other reasons than thought. This is, okay, in an unpleasant sense, remember, the same way that pain is unpleasant but valuable. It's not a bad thing to feel pain. It's an unpleasant thing to feel pain. But if I got stabbed in the leg and didn't feel pain, that would be bad, because I would be unlikely to adjust anything that I'm doing to accommodate for this damage that's been done, right? I'm not addressing it. I'm continuing to walk as normal, and things are ripping and tearing and whatever. Things that are unpleasant are not bad. Things that are pleasant are not good. Sometimes, most of the time, theoretically, things that you feel, whether unpleasant or pleasant, are useful to feel, are appropriate, given the circumstances, they're helpful. Of course, the nature of what is pleasant versus unpleasant is what's desirable. We want pleasant stuff. Again, pain wouldn't do anything for us if we wanted it, because it wouldn't draw our attention to what's going on. The whole point is that we want to eliminate pain. We want to pursue pleasure. So let's talk about trauma for a second, because this makes the point, I think, in a way that is accessible, is that people generally will say, like we generally in our culture understand that if a person experiences something traumatic, that impacts the way they think and feel and behave later on after the fact, right? So we acknowledge right off the bat that there are things that happen to us that change how we think and feel and behave, even in long-term, impactful, large-scale ways that have nothing to do with a thought or an understanding of like, I think it would make sense to do this thing in this way. It happens in other ways. That isn't just about bad stuff. That isn't just about unpleasant stuff. And in trauma, we're obviously, when we're talking about trauma, the word trauma means damage. So we're talking about painful, unpleasant things. And when we're talking about like the impacts of trauma, we're talking about other things that happened after that initial thing that are also problematic. Maybe unpleasant, maybe unhelpful, whatever, right? Like I panic when I hear the sound of, the thing that popped into my mind was The West Wing, where when he hears a marching band, he starts to get really panicky and anxious because there was a marching band playing during a traumatic event earlier in his life. So we're identifying like something's happening that isn't super useful as a response to this current stimuli. And then we theorize about why that's happening. And we theorize that, because that would have been a useful response to that same or similar stimuli in a past experience. And so now you're responding to the same stimuli in this experience in the way that it would have been helpful to respond back then. So both the initial thing was unpleasant and the fact that you're still doing it in this new context is bad, or we wouldn't be exploring it at all, right? Good stuff too, right? When good things happen, that also changes the way that you feel and the way that you think and the way that you behave moving forward. We don't talk about it as much because that's the whole point of everything we're saying here, that unpleasant stuff, painful stuff, that draws the attention. Pleasant, likable, good, happy stuff doesn't draw the attention. It's not a problem and therefore doesn't need to be solved. That doesn't mean we can't notice it, but we're much, much less likely to notice it. And if we do, we're much less likely to discuss it than we are to discuss when there's pain or difficulty going on. That's not bad. That's how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to solve the problems that exist. And when something's not a problem, we can enjoy it and consider it and whatever. But it's not as important to discuss it with others, right? Doesn't mean it's not worth doing, actually. One of the solutions is to discuss that stuff more. Because here's like the actionable thing. Well, okay, let me change that. What I'm about to say is not actionable, but it leads to actionable things. Language. Language is the cheat code. It's not the cheat code. It is the code, right? That thought, consciousness, all this stuff is built on top of language. Whatever we're talking about, if we're talking about like, I think, it's really important to me to help other people, is a thought that I had at some point. I thought like, I like helping other people, or I just helped someone and I really liked that and I connected to a larger thing. And then that kind of gets encoded in these processes, and my subsequent experiences, the things I think and the things I feel and the things that I do later, they're filtered through that thing that was encoded. I like helping people. That doesn't mean it's true or untrue. It just means that it's impacting what we think and what we do and what we feel moving on from that. Well, every single one of those things is language, symbolic representation. And so if we want to change these things, the way that we change it is by changing the language. We can talk about it as changing what you think or changing what you believe or whatever, but in observable terms, what we're talking about is changing the language that you're using, changing the connections that you've made from this symbol to that thing that you are symbolizing or representing, connecting this piece of language to this other piece of language so that these schemas not, if, for example, to use a cliche one that I think is not a good or useful one, but pain is just weakness leaving the body, right? We're taking the word pain, the symbolic sign, the symbol of pain, that concept, the language for it, the symbol that's been assigned to it, and connecting it not only to the physical sensation of pain that I've already connected it to, but now connecting it to this other idea of weakness leaving the body, and the effort in the hopes, therefore, that like when I feel that physical sensation, I think of it as weakness leaving the body rather than like a bad thing. Again, I don't like that one. That's not generally a useful one. As it's limited use in specific context. Language is how we change things. And thinking, the kind of thinking that you're talking about, right, is a reduced version. It's language, right? You had language in your mind that was, this will kill me, and then you had different language of like, no, I can do this, and that changed what happened next, which is true. This happens all the time. Thinking it, though, is more costly and less impactful than saying it out loud. On the scale of like how impactful, how efficient and effective it is to use language, the most impactful is saying it for a particular purpose in a context in which it is relevant to other people, at least one or more other people, that saying it to them is relevant and then results in like some helpful or useful thing happening, the thing I was trying to make happen. That's going to be encoded the most. And then the very least is just thinking it to myself in my head, which is better than nothing at all, but it's like the last. And on that scale, the more that you have to do like behavior, meaning say it out loud or write it or whatever, the more efficient it's going to be. And doing it to other people is more effective because that also involves like getting feedback and response, observing how they think and how they respond and whatever in response to whatever you just said. So it's additional information, it encodes it even more. But in the absence of having other people, saying it out loud to yourself is more effective than thinking it in your mind. If talking to oneself, by the way, if a person speaking to themselves was actually a sign of insanity, then why would we have to say that, right? Like, let me say that differently. A different example. Interruption is the most efficient form of communication given a certain kind of communication, the kind that humans experience generally, which is like interactive, two or a small group of people having meaningful conversation back and forth where what I say impacts what you say and vice versa. It's a very inefficient thing to do in the specific framework of like, I am one of a group of people and there's one or a few people talking to the group. In that case, me interrupting to ask clarification or respond to something does make it more likely for me to get stuff out of it, but disrupts the ability for other people to get out of it. So we get taught not to interrupt. But we get taught not to interrupt because we interrupt by nature because it is the more efficient way to do it. We get taught not to talk to yourself because we are already talking to ourselves because it's inherently an effective thing to do. This is honestly a fun example I'm realizing as I say it, of what I'm talking about, is that people will talk to themselves out loud. You've seen it in movies and shows, and you've probably said it to yourself, right? You'll be talking out loud, and then someone says, and now I'm talking to myself out loud. Great, I'm a crazy person. Or I should stop talking to myself out loud. And then they do stop talking. It is more effective to do it. But if you say this is a bad thing to do, then you stop. Not always, but you're much more likely to stop. If you didn't say this is a bad thing to do, or this is crazy, or I feel like a fool, then you would just keep doing it. I'll remind you, it's really useful, really important, valuable for us to be able to consciously override our unconsidered response to stimuli. And just because we think something is a better way to do it doesn't mean it actually is. Sometimes we consciously override our unconsidered response to stimuli, and that makes everything worse because we're wrong sometimes. The unconsidered response is suboptimal or harmful or problematic sometimes, but our thought about what will be better is also wrong sometimes. There's a reason we have both. If we were always right about what's the best thing to do, then we would not have evolved a system that makes it so that like fight or flight wouldn't exist, as an example, if it was always better to think, to be like using the prefrontal cortex and advanced abstraction and pattern recognition and projection abilities. If that was always going to lead to better conclusions, then there wouldn't be something built into us to be like, nope, shut that off, stop that. We're going to just do stuff that the body's doing now. Sometimes it's worse. In fact, it's often worse. You're not supposed to be satisfied with everything all the time. At any given moment, you are satisfied by definition with the vast majority of your experience because you can only think about a very small number of things at the same time. And satisfied means just unconcerned with, right? You're not thinking about how it's a problem and you want it to be different. Doesn't mean you like it, but we're not talking about being satisfied, or we're not talking about liking everything. We're talking about being satisfied. If we were talking about liking everything, we would use that language. Satisfied just means it's enough. Literally, you're hungry, you eat. Once you no longer feel hunger, you are satisfied. So once the negative signal, the unpleasant signal is gone, you're satisfied. So anything you're not thinking about is something with which you are satisfied. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Happiness is the things which are happening in my life are things that I like. New thought words are best used as vibrations. Self-talk is best out loud. Yes, that's another scientific piece of evidence I can give to help convince people of this. Although worth noting, we encode this thought that talking to oneself is crazy or bad somehow. And now, even though I just explained the logic of it and how it's better and it's not harmful, what is the problem? Well, it's crazy. Well, what if that's not a thing, right? There are inherent benefits to it. The only downside is if you think that it means something bad that it doesn't actually mean. Even with all that, it's still hard to convince us to override that baked in belief. If you ever try to get a kid to eat something that they have thought, I don't like X thing, it's really hard to override that. That's not baked into the body and the DNA. That's in these processes. We lay down these beliefs, these thoughts that we accept as true, and then that filters everything that happens later. And even later on when we go back and we're like, oh, back when I used to think I was a bad person, I deserve bad things, that was wrong. I'm not. I'm a good person. I deserve good things. That's great. We can change that. It doesn't automatically eliminate the influence that belief had on all the other things that have happened since then, everything we've perceived and everything we've thought and everything we've felt. So we can change that initial thing. We're still always going to find remnants of the old thing. We'll never be done. There will be new things coming up and we'll have to identify, or it's useful to identify oh, that's another one of those things where it would have made sense if I thought I was a bad person and deserved bad things, but I'm not. So I got to change this too. Thought it'd be the other day because Hank Green posted a video talking about how delayed sleep phase symptom is only a disorder when it's detrimental to your life, but it isn't inherently bad. Yeah, well, all right, let me finish responding to the first thing and then respond to the, oh wait, why would I be crazy to talk to the smartest person in the room anyway? Ha ha ha. Thought you would like the way he talked about it. I do, that's great. So another piece of evidence for this, right, is if you are aware of the vagus nerve, which is one of the main trunk nerves involved in the fight or flight system. That stimulating the vagus nerve helps to regulate and shift you out of fight or flight and into rest and digest, are the colloquial terms. Help shift you away from high anxiety, high vigilance, spending a lot of resources being careful because I think I'm in danger. I'm in a space where I'm ready to move that into no, I'm safe. I can chill and just relax and do nice things that are good for me in the long term. So stimulating the vagus nerve helps with that. And various ways to look at doing that, but what the research comes back with over and over is that probably the most impactful way is vibration, specifically vibration right along here. So I keep gesturing here. Many of you, if you think about the things that help ground or center you through this lens, you'll realize that vibration, especially vibration right along here. If you're a cat person and you know that experience of when my cat sits right here and I'm petting them and they're purring, I got the pressure and the weight and the vibration right here and the soft tactile sense of petting the cat attached to the meaning of I like this cat and the cat likes me and this is nice. If you like to sing, That's vibration. So on top of vibration, the most effective seems to be internally generated vibration, which means using the vocal cords. Like meditative practices involve chanting. It's not even necessarily about having, saying meaningful things as much as it is about just generating vibration by using your vocal cords. Singing, chanting, praying. There's a reason we have so many cultural practices all through time and history and all across the world in different cultures involving using the voice. Talk to yourself out loud. It is helpful. It's better than just thinking. Because you can't control your thoughts. People think you can, but you can't. You can't totally control your behavior either, but you have a lot more influence over your behavior than your thought. Right now, try to think like you should not think of a purple elephant. Try to think your way into not thinking about a purple elephant. Any thought you try is a thought about a purple elephant. But if I say, don't say the word purple elephant, you can make that happen, right? Not forever. It takes resources. You have to pay attention to what you're saying and make sure it doesn't come up. I picked a phrase, but like if I were to say like, don't say the word the, that's going to be really hard. I'm doing it right now, and it is very difficult, and it requires resources that I don't usually spend on this kind of a thing, but I can do it. Sooner or later, I'm going to stop doing it, and then it's going to come out when it comes out, right? If you want to change your thoughts, you got to change the way you speak and the way you write and the way that you interpret what you hear and what you read. That's how the thoughts change. This is why affirmations work, for example. Not affirmations of the sense of like, I will be a millionaire by the end of the year, because not everything is under your ability to influence. But in the sense of like, I'm happy right now. You say that enough and you will end up happier than you started. Unless, as sometimes does happen, you encode that as this is something I'm saying to myself because I am a sad person. And I have to say it to myself to try and make myself be happy. And in that case, every time you say it, you're just reinforcing to yourself that you are a sad person. So the meaning matters. That's why I'm always talking about what do people mean by a word. Not what does it mean in the dictionary? What's the correct usage? Would somebody get marked as like improper grammar or whatever on an English essay? We're talking about what an individual means by it. If I use the word anxiety to mean racing thoughts, but also just, when I'm worried about something in the future going in a way I don't want it to go, but also rapid breathing and increased heart rate and queasiness and flushed skin and like all these different things, then if I just ran and now I'm breathing shallowly and my heart is beating faster, I can look at that and say, why am I anxious right now? I use that example because in real life, that's not likely to happen because we have a different explanation. Why is my heart beating and my breathing shallow? Because I just ran. But anytime it happens without you logically being able to say what it was that just caused it, then you go to, ooh, that's anxiety. So yes, in the same way that when we're talking about like wanting your body to feel a certain way, we're going to talk about sleep and diet, like the things that you're putting into your body and whatever. If you want to talk about the way that you're thinking and the way that you are feeling in terms of emotions, not the physical sensation portion, but the cognitive portion, right? Anxiety is not just a physical sensation. It's that and some thoughts about the future and how things might go badly or what might be happening that's wrong or whatever. Language is your diet. You are what you eat. If you keep saying that you're a failure, then you are going to think and feel and behave in the way that it would make sense for you, whatever that word means to you. You're going to think and feel and behave in the way it would make sense to think and feel and behave if it was true that you were a failure. Even if you don't think it's true, if you say it, you're going to think and feel and behave as though it is. That's one of the big problems here is people overestimate the thinking, and therefore we ignore our use of language. For a very common thing, self-deprecating humor. I'll say like, I know I'm so ugly or whatever. And in my mind, I know I don't really think I'm so ugly. That's just a joke that I'm saying or whatever. But you say it enough and the words override what's in your mind and that starts to shift. I don't really think I'm ugly, but I don't think I'm not ugly either. it goes further and further in that direction. You are not capable of anything. I was saying this earlier. Capability is a problematic word. Potential is a terrible word. People only talk about potential. The word potential is only used when we're talking about something that someone isn't currently or hasn't been doing that we think is good and that we think that they are entirely capable of doing. Except for when we say you are meeting your potential, every other use of that word is about something that we think you could or should be doing that would be better than what you have done thus far. It sounds nice to think of myself as like I can do anything I set my mind to, except that it's not true. So then when I don't do something, I'm like, why am I not setting my mind to that? And then I'm focused on trying to set my mind to things as though that's the only variable that matters. I have a friend who describes himself as a lazy person because he believes if he cared enough about his work, he wouldn't procrastinate and dither on it so much. And from my perspective, that's not a helpful way to look at it, because it looks to me like he obviously cares plenty about doing a good job, but I also don't want to tell him that his experience is wrong. Well, this is why language matters. His experience isn't wrong, and his awareness of his experience isn't wrong either. Again, as I'm talking about like all of this stuff, nothing I'm ever saying is about this is what that word means or what it's supposed to mean or how you should use it or what should be. It's just about pointing out what is happening. If you think of yourself in that language, if you think that what you're doing is called procrastinating, and procrastinating means the thing that you think that it means, whatever it means to you, and you connect it to the idea of being lazy, then the end result of that is you are going to think and feel and do the things that you are currently thinking and feeling and doing. If you don't like that and want to change it, you have to change the other stuff. You can't think all that other stuff and use all that other language and then have a different outcome. For the most part, this stuff isn't about right or wrong. It literally couldn't be identified as right or wrong, although we generally in our culture talk about it as though it can be identified as right or wrong, which is part of the issue. Procrastinate, for example. What do you mean you're procrastinating? And then people say, like I'm not doing something that I'm supposed to do. Okay, but that doesn't say the reason that you're doing it, right? Like if you ever have identified, here's the thing I'm supposed to do and I'm not doing it, but I still intend to do it later, I can call that procrastinating. Yeah, okay, great. That doesn't give us anything to do. That's just labeling what's happening, right? That's like saying, I feel nauseous, right? That's what's happening. It doesn't tell us why, and it doesn't give us anything to do about it. We have to explore like what might be going on that's causing that. Also, notably, if I am procrastinating just means like there's something I'm supposed to do and I'm not doing it. Well, what about like, do you procrastinate eating or do you just forget to eat? If you know, and when I work with people, this is going to be something that I make sure that people understand. If you know that enjoyment is important, honestly, the point of life is to enjoy it. So that's what we're aiming to get at. But before getting people there, I can at least get you to understand like sleep is important. If you think productivity is all that matters, you have to understand that getting good rest enables you to be productive tomorrow. And if you skip that, that doesn't work. So if you go to bed late, do we call that procrastinating on sleep? Sure, sometimes. What if you make yourself wake up early for no reason? Is that procrastinating on getting enough sleep? What about going on a date with your spouse or significant other, or engaging with something that you enjoy, something that you know that is enjoyable, is restful, restorative, helps you, and you're not doing it? Do we call that procrastinating? Probably not. So it's not about that his experience is wrong. His thoughts are wrong. Experience is not a thing that it can be wrong or right? I am angry. That's not a statement about like that could be challenged as what is true or not. I mean, obviously I could be lying, right? I could be feeling angry and say I'm not, or not feeling angry and say that I am. But the thing I am feeling is not a thing which can be determined to be accurate or inaccurate. It's just what I am feeling, whatever it is. The statement about it could be accurate or not. Thoughts can be accurate or inaccurate. I think it's going to rain today. That might or might not happen. I feel sad. It's not about a thing that might or might not be true. It's just an observation. really, really useful and important to separate these things out. I'll have to tell him he said his thoughts are wrong. Joking. Honestly, sometimes I do use that language. That's not generally the language I think is the most precise language, but it can be very useful and impactful to say that to the right person in the right place. To be like, no, you're wrong. I say that a lot to people. Usually because I'm trying to tap into something that they think or experience in response to the idea of being wrong. And I'm trying to get them to come around on the idea that, like, yeah, of course it's wrong because I'm wrong and all people are wrong and every thought that we have is wrong. A map of the United States is a useful symbolic representation of a thing, and having the map allows us to navigate it and interact with it in ways that we couldn't without the map. But the map is wrong. It's accurate, but it is not the same as the territory itself. If this person didn't know the concept of laziness or the concept of procrastination, whatever he's doing theoretically would still be the same, but he couldn't say he's doing it, he's procrastinating, or that he's procrastinating because he's lazy. If I hold this tea mug and then I slap it, I'm stopping myself, but if I didn't and I just smacked it, it would fall to the ground, potentially shatter, certainly whatever's in it would spill. And then if I said, why did that happen? We would all say, well, because you hit it, which is true. And are there any other variables that I could change that even if I hit it exactly the same way, a different outcome occurs? Yeah. If I held it like this, I could slap it the same way and it doesn't fall. If gravity doesn't exist, it doesn't fall. If it's made of a different material, it doesn't break. Those are not as useful, right? The most relevant, immediate, changeable thing is, well, just don't hit it. So we start with trying to change that. But if that can't be changed, and this is going to keep happening, and we want the tea not to fall, the mug not to fall, then we look at what are the other variables instead of just getting stuck with being like, well, I can't make this stop happening, so the tea mug is going to fall and break. That's just what it is. Honestly, short version of this, the problem that he's struggling with is a direct result of his beliefs of what the problem are. If a person thinks that they should be doing more productive things, then they do what we started this conversation about. We use our consciousness to override our body's impulses and ignore the signals that we're getting about, in this case, what we would call it like not wanting to do it. We equate that to not caring, even though we don't like it, which obviously, if you didn't care, then why would you be thinking about it at all? Why would you dislike that it is going the way that it is going, or judge yourself or want it to be any different? Obviously, you want it to be different. But we think if I just think the right way, I can make myself do more. So we do, and that works. It's like using a credit card to pay a bill. Like, you can do it and it works. And so then the next time that you're like, oh, I'm not feeling up to this, I'm having a hard time getting myself moving, or whatever you're going to describe it as, you can override it again. You use the credit card again. But if you think that using a credit card is the same thing as spending money that's in your account, then you're going to be in for a really rough time as you start to approach the limit. And as the interest starts coming due, you're going to be like, what the hell's going on? He thinks that he could do more if he just cares more. He believes, like we've been talking about, that people do the things that they want to do or that they care about or that they think are important or whatever, and they don't do the things that they don't care about. So he is trying to make himself care about this stuff in order to get himself to do that stuff. And it works, but over time it works less and less and less and less because there are limits. And as you approach those limits, this strategy becomes less effective and then eventually does not work at all, which we often refer to as burnout these days. And you think, I can do this because I've done it before, but capability is not static or binary. The average person in an 8-hour engaged in intellectual labor in an 8-hour workday works about 2.5 hours of that day. That's not like some really lazy people only do. That's the average. For every person that's doing 5 hours of work in an 8-hour workday, there's a person doing none, right? This kind of language doesn't have a metric on it. How much work is he doing? Is that being tracked? This is like a person who is saying like, I'm procrastinating on making myself bench press 1,000 pounds. because I'm lazy. If I just stop procrastinating, I could do it. Like, just because you think you can doesn't mean you can. And in fact, the evidence suggests that you can't because you're trying to and it's not working. Generally, if we try to do something and we don't, we would then say, like, well, that doesn't work. Instead of, no, I just got to try it even harder. Yes, but along with people do what they want to do and don't do what they don't want to do, whatever, one of the corollaries with that is that feeling bad is good and feeling good is bad. Like, I shouldn't be okay with the amount of work that I'm doing. If I just relax and say, like, it's okay, it's fine, it's no big deal. Pretty much every client I ever work with that talks about, like, I'm not sending emails and I'm failing to get things done at work and whatever. And then I ask, and what's the problem that's been caused by that? Has anyone expressed to you that they have an issue with what you're doing? Or was there some, like, observable outcome, like some bad thing that happened because of something you didn't do? The vast majority of the time, no. How much I should do is just an idea I have, and I'm not meeting that idea, but everything's fine. I mean, when we talk about what people generally term these days imposter syndrome, we're pretty much only talking about this at this point, right? Is everybody thinks it's going great and I've gotten promoted or I've gotten hired and, like, everybody thinks I'm doing a great job, but I'm not. I'm doing a bad job. What does that mean? You're not matching your idea of what a good job is, but you are matching what everybody else's idea of what a good job is. So is it a good job or not? Well, good and bad are subjective. It's about how a person views it. So it could be either. And that's like an endless quagmire. But if we back it up and just look at some observable metrics, right? Like, have you or your company, like, lost money because of something that you did? Has some, like, problem occurred, an observable problem occurred? Has somebody said something? Has a client been lost? Has a shipment been missed? Has it whatever? Sometimes yes to those things, and those are worth paying attention to. But if you're doing this, then, like, well, the time I missed a thing and it caused a problem and a shipment got delayed, I just lumped that in with the same stuff as that time I didn't send that email that I thought I should send, even though that didn't cause a problem. And now I'm not looking at a specific, like, actionable thing that I could do. People would rather create narratives about how if I have the ideation, the execution should be automatic. And so if execution isn't happening, I just got to do more ideation. We would rather think that because that keeps us in our strong suit, which is ideation. We're really good at thinking. So we'll just think about stuff more. But if you buy a house for, I'm just going to say $1 million to make it easy. If you buy a house for $1 million, then can you afford to buy that house? Well, yes, by definition, you were able to. And then the next day you decide to go buy another house for $1 million and you can't. Even though you want to, you can't. And then we say, like, well, we know you can do this because you just did this yesterday. No, it has a cost. And yesterday you had the resources available to be able to pay that cost, and today you don't. You understand the ideation, how to do it is still there, but to execute requires resources. I know how to write an email. I know how to fill out this form or complete that project. Yeah, but knowing how to do something and doing it are two different things. And if you want to just keep trying to think about it, that's fine, but it's not likely to get anything done if the issue is an issue of execution. There is not always another magical idea that if I can just come up with it, then things will happen. Sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes you think about it enough and you realize, oh, you know what? I could automate this, or I could cut that, or create this system. And you have these resources to execute on creating those things. That does work sometimes. Yeah, he's concerned he's going to get fired because he isn't productive enough. But honestly, he's in a really competitive, billable hours driven field, so I can't tell him he won't. Of course not. You can't tell him he won't. He can't tell you he will. He's saying he's worried he will. If this is a client of mine, then I say, what's your evidence? Well, I'm not productive enough. What is your evidence that you're not productive enough? Well, we're supposed to get X amount of billable hours and I haven't been getting that. Okay. So we can now work on what can be done to make it so that you're getting those billable hours. But if it's, I'm not doing everything that I should be doing. Okay, well, do you have a quota of billable hours you're supposed to meet? Yes. Are you meeting that quota? Yes. Okay. Are other people doing about the same as what you're doing? I don't think so. I think they're doing a lot more. What's your evidence for that? Well, I know how much everyone's doing, and they are doing significantly more than me, so I'm the weakest performer on the team. Okay, I believe that. What's your evidence that being the weakest performer on the team is likely to result in you being fired? Is that a thing that you've seen done or have been told is likely to happen? Is that like every once in a while they just fire the lowest performer even though that person is also meeting their targets? That could be true, but it might not be. Everybody's too focused on their thoughts. Just because you think you're not productive enough doesn't mean other people think the same thing. And yes, if I say like, no, I think you're productive enough, they'll be like, no, you don't understand. Yeah, because I'm not making that claim either. I don't know. I want you to pay attention to what's actually happening, not what your thoughts are. Has your boss said anything, expressed any unhappiness or dissatisfaction with how productive you've been or how many billable hours you have accrued? If yes, cool, let's deal with that. If no, that doesn't mean it's impossible that they might be unhappy about it and just haven't said anything about it. But what are we supposed to do about that? If the absence of any evidence is treated as evidence that it exists because I know they hate me. How do you know they hate you? Because they have never said it. They only say nice things. It's not that that's an impossible thing. That could be true that a person hates you, but they only say nice things. But if you treat that as evidence that someone hates you, then there will never be a case in which you have evidence that someone doesn't hate you. Because either they say things and they hate you, or they don't and they hate you. What does he want? What is he trying to accomplish? Is he trying to get promoted? What does he want? If it's just what he's trying to avoid, getting fired, then we just need to look at the evidence that may or may not happen, figure out what it is, and then come up with actionable solutions to it. But that's almost definitely not what's happening. Almost definitely what is happening is he is working a lot more than is sustainable, probably more than other people are. It's generally what happens is that I work 6 out of the 8 hours and I know I'm not working the other 2, but I'm only working the 6 because I believe I should be working the 8. And so being unable to do the last 2 is like, what is wrong with me? And I assume everybody else is doing the full 8 when really I'm doing more than twice as much as everybody else is doing. It's funny how people like that generally, if you ask, will also be very clear of everybody else is just chatting with each other at the water cooler or just shopping online all the time. I'm the only one on the team that carries my weight. They have all this evidence that other people aren't working more than them, and they still reference back to this idea of no, I'm not doing as much as a person is supposed to do. The 40-hour work week is not based around what people are sustainably capable of, certainly not intellectually. It is, to some extent, based around what people are capable of sustainably doing with a relatively low mistake or error rate when what is being done is mindless and repetitive and generally not very physically taxing. The 40-hour work week was designed around factory work, right? Where each person, you're just doing a thing. You don't have to think about it. It's the same thing. You have to think about it first when you're learning it, but you get used to it. And then it's just, you just stand there and do the same thing for 8 hours a day without having to think about it. Errors happen, mistakes are made. If you start to scale the hours up much past that, those mistakes start to scale up at a higher rate. It's not exactly optimized, but there has been some thought and work done over the years in that direction. But that's a different kind of work. Tell me to pick up a bottle cap from here and put it here for 8 hours a day. I'm not going to like it. It's going to be miserable, but I probably can do it without missing too many bottle caps or putting them in the wrong spot. Tell me to do algebra for 8 hours, and I'm probably not going to be able to do that without making a lot of mistakes or seriously slowing down on my response time. My boss is busy all day running from project to project, but most of that time is scheduled meetings that are hard to procrastinate on. Meetings are a different thing. Well, different kinds of meetings are different things, but as a general thing, meetings are a different thing, especially if you're the boss and not the person who is meeting with the boss. Um, think of that a lot more like hanging out with friends in terms of like energy expenditure and stuff. That no, it's still not something you can do forever, and it's still taxing, but it's different than doing your math homework. There's a different set of skills involved. You're responding and observing rather than having to do everything in your head. It's a different kind of thing. Also, people, especially bosses, and I am not like this is pot calling the kettle black for sure. Um, we tend to schedule because we do, not all of us, but because some of us do still think about like our framework. Even if I know intellectually the 40-hour work week is not based on intellectual labor, there's still stuff in me, and there's still stuff in the structure of our world, including like how pay is done and taxes and different things that are based around this 40-hour thing. And so we still have this tendency then to be like, well, I got to fill my 40 hours. And if I'm a boss, my job is communication and coordination with the team. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time in meetings. If I'm the boss and I'm sitting in my office just like chilling and playing games and like doing whatever I feel like doing, and my team is out there working, then for the most part, most people, I like to assume good faith, are going to feel kind of guilty about that. Like, oh, how can I be asking them to do stuff when I'm in here not doing it and I'm just having fun, but I'm asking them to do stuff they don't want to do. Some bosses get to a place where they're okay doing that. But for the most part, those kinds of bosses are, in order to get to that place, other bad stuff comes along with it. Like, you know, what I want matters and what they want doesn't matter kind of thing. Or I've earned this and they haven't yet, and that kind of stuff. Anyway, you go on, and I should get wrapping up here soon. But here's the useful, I think, takeaway from that very first question. Imagine you have a bank account with a special currency, right? It's not American, US dollars, whatever. It's this special unique currency. And that currency is the currency that allows you to override your impulse, your habit, your default unconsidered response to stimuli, in order to make yourself do something that you wouldn't otherwise naturally do without like thinking about it and making yourself consciously do it, or in order to consciously make yourself not do something that if you weren't to consciously intervene, you would do it. In either of those cases, you have to spend some of that currency. That's the most useful way to think about it. You can do it when you have the resources available. And some things cost more and some things cost less. So just because you can override yourself on this doesn't mean you can override yourself on this other bigger thing. And if you think about it that way, just like buying a house for $1 million and now you want to buy another one for $1 million, I'm not saying you shouldn't want that or it's a bad idea. I'm saying if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And if it's important, and if you're sitting here telling me, no, you don't understand how important this is, I might get fired. Okay, well, I believe you. If it's important then, well, then we better do what would need to be done in order to make it work. If it's really that important for you to increase your billable hours, then we really need to figure out what needs to be done in order for you to get more money in that bank account for you to override your impulses. And the stuff, generally speaking, that puts money into that account is the stuff that you enjoy. So if you think that doing stuff you enjoy is a waste, that's like someone who wants to buy a house for $1 million and they have no money. And they say, no, I don't need to go earn money. That's a waste. That's just a distraction. I need to figure out how to buy this house. And every time we say, well, you got to go earn some money to do it. No, I don't need to do that. That's not necessary. I'm not going to die. I mean, I would like to have money, but I don't need it. I just need to get this house. You're skipping it. He's heard me talk a lot about using up spell slots. Yeah. It's true what people believe. It is true that there are things that whether you like doing it or don't is not the same as whether it is worth doing or important to do or bad. These are different metrics. Again, our culture teaches that you should want to do it, you should like things, that if something is happening that you don't want, that means it's bad and shouldn't happen. No. And one of those things is like you can want, again, last metaphor, and then I really got to wrap it up. It's like if an athlete, like breaks their leg, that sucks. Everybody knows that sucks. Nobody's looking at that and being like, oh, that's not a problem. It's a problem. It's terrible. And they want to get back out on the field and play. And everybody can understand that. Yeah, totally. You're good at it. You like doing it. It's how you make your money. It's important. Maybe you'll lose your job if you don't. But you're injured and you can't. And then that person is saying, like, the next day, like, okay, yes, I got injured yesterday, but I'm fine now. Let me go back out there. And it has to be other people saying, no, you have to rest more. I don't want to rest more. I just want to go do my job. Great. You can't. And if you try, because you can make yourself try, you're likely to just make the injury worse. If a person is, quote unquote, procrastinating for a long period of time, then what's happened is they've gotten injured and they don't want to have to sit and rest and heal. They don't believe that's necessary. No, that's not for me. I can tough through this. My willpower is stronger than that. I can just make it happen. And they go back out there and they make themselves do it again, and it gets re-injured. And so they've just been playing on a broken leg for 2 years. If they want to do more, it's not that it's impossible. I'm not saying this is the best you could ever do, because that's the other thing that will come across sometimes when you're saying, like, you're not lazy, you're not procrastinating, this is just how it works. People will be like, no, I can't have it this way. I don't want it this way. I want it to be better. Great. Then dude, you've got to do the hard work. You got to rest even though you don't think you should. Whether you think you should, whether you want to, is not the same as whether it's real. Wanting to do more isn't getting you to do more. Believing that rest is unimportant or that enjoyment is unimportant, how's that working? If you were to tell me, like, it's a sacrifice I'm making, but look, it's working out and I'm getting everything done, okay, then I'll listen to that. But if you're saying, no, I'm sacrificing rest and enjoyment and not allowing myself any of that, I got to be stressed and I got to focus in on this stuff that I'm not doing and I can't let myself relax. And the problem is not getting any better, then what are we doing? Yeah, I've been thinking about it as capacity building lately, but I've been thinking of it as both practicing doing things I enjoy, but also practicing slowly stretching what I am able to do with my resources. For what it's worth, when you get to a certain point in this process, like when I'm working with people, very, very early on, like as you start to make some of these changes, the most dangerous stuff is enjoyable stuff. That's, I think, honestly, part of the reason that people fixate on this, like, no, I got to be productive, is because they also know, people will tell you, right, like, no, I can't play video games because if I do, like last time I started playing and I had a good time and then I looked up and 3 hours had passed. Right, this idea that, like, feeling good is a bad thing. This idea that if I do that stuff, it will only lead to me doing more of that stuff, even though that person is saying, I did that stuff and enjoyed it, and now I don't do it at all. So the evidence is, no, enjoying something actually makes you less likely to do it again. We think about it this other way. Practice makes things more efficient, meaning you get better return on investment. The more you do something, the more that dollar buys you. In other words, like, okay, if it costs me $1 to override my impulse to smoke a cigarette, every time I do that, and this is a bad example, because in this particular case, it gets more expensive for a little while as the physical, like, withdrawal and whatever symptoms ramp up. Let me do a different thing. Flossing. If it costs me $1 to get myself to floss, even though I don't have the impulse to floss, after doing it once, the next time is going to cost me 99 cents, and the next time is going to cost me 97. And we do, over time, get these things to now be the new unconsidered response. That now I just floss at night and it costs me nothing to do that. In fact, it would cost me something to make myself not floss now. But you don't get to skip to that. You have to spend the money to get there, and you have to spend it over time. You can't do it in all one lump sum. No, I'm willing to just take my whole day and really think about this and really shift it all. Doesn't matter. It's not, you can't do it all at once. You have to do it over and over and over and over and over again for it to get more efficient. So it is skill building or capacity building, in the sense that your maximum capacity increases because I can accomplish more per dollar in this specific domain now than I used to be able to. But we want to keep an eye on that it still takes resources. Even once it gets to the point where flossing takes zero in this and overriding my default response and making myself do it, it's still going to cost some resources in terms of the energy to do it or whatever, right? Doing anything costs, sleeping costs resources. Everybody has had that experience of being too tired to go to sleep. You got to free resources up first, then make the change. If it's really important to buy that house, if it's really important to get your billable hours up, I hear you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I am just pointing out to you, whether you like it or not, that the strategy you've been utilizing isn't working. So you can keep trying it and hope that it will be different because you think that it should be. And maybe you're even right. Maybe if you keep trying it, at some point it will change. But generally, wouldn't you say that it's pretty foolish to continue to try a strategy that you have tried and that has failed over and over and over and over and over and over and over? If someone were to say, I tried that and it didn't work and actually things got worse, but I think if I try it harder, things will get better. Like, again, it could happen. It's not that it never happens, but it's very unlikely, and it's a pretty unreasonable conclusion to come to. Let's try some other stuff. Convincing people of that is difficult. That's why I'm so focused on all this language and I use all these metaphors and all this stuff. The ideas are simple. Getting people to actually encode those ideas, trust them, override, and replace earlier ideas is difficult. And then, like, and then actually making the changes is a whole nother thing. Some changes happen automatically when the language and the ideas change. Some do not. You can really genuinely come to the conclusion that you are worthy of being happy and you deserve help. And then still you will be thinking and feeling and behaving as though you are not worthy and don't deserve help most of the time. Because changing that one underlying belief doesn't change all the habits and all the patterns and the structures of your life on top of it. But once you change that underlying thing, which does change some stuff right away, one of the things that it changes right away is it changes the way you perceive things and the way you think about things. So now when you have another experience, you're like, oh, that's another one of those things where I'm acting like I don't deserve help. And then you can change that there. And you can change it again and again and again every time you notice it. And you do that enough, and it goes away, right? There's always still, at least in theory, some edge case where it's going to pop back up again. But for the most part, people's lives are relatively repetitive. And so making changes within a few specific domains, with how you go to work and how you interact with your kids and your spouse or whatever, is going to cover most of your life. Anyway, I don't know. I meandered a lot. We got to get going. If you want to make yourself do something, override your physical limitations, get yourself to initiate or execute on a task that your impulse is not to execute on. There's only one way to do that. That's to spend money out of that account. The mechanism of how you spend that money is you just literally say to yourself, no, I'm going to do this. Not, I think I should do this, or I think people don't what's the word I'm looking for? Equivocate? I don't know. Instead of saying like, I'm going to do this, people will be like, I'm going to try to do this because what if I don't? But you could say, I'm going to do this and you still don't do it, right? So why are you hedging? That's what I was looking for. Why are you hedging by saying, I'm going to try to do this? Either way, you might still not do it. What's the difference is that if I say, I'm going to try and then I don't, then at least I'm like, well, I wasn't wrong. And that makes you feel better, fine. It makes it more likely that you'll do it if you say, I'm going to do it. It doesn't mean it will happen. So that's why we want to change the way you respond to that so it doesn't feel as bad. Just set your intention, but that's just your intention. You don't know what the future is going to hold. Just because you think tomorrow at 7:00 will be a good time to do the thing doesn't mean tomorrow at 7:00 will be a good time to do the thing. There is no try. Yes, do or do not, there is no try. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, hey, if you want to do something, you can just do it. Don't half-ass things. I mean it in the sense of, this is what I think Yoda means by it, but I don't really know. It's just my interpretation. To me, it is, there is only what is happening. If you refer to what you are doing as trying, then you're negating what is happening as being unimportant, right? What is happening is only matters in that it is something you have connected to some other outcome later. I think of it as drawing attention to like what you are doing is what you are doing. If you think of it as trying to do some other thing, like for example, if I am trying to get myself to go to the store, I am thinking about going to the store. I am thinking thoughts like I should go to the store. That's what you're doing. If you label it as a trying to do something else, then you're centering the thing which isn't happening, which may or may not happen. I think that's kind of what it was getting at, just because it's got like connections to Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and stuff. A lot of that focus of like bringing your mind back to the present moment, to reality, and to your body, and to what is happening, not your ideas about what should happen. Because literally in that scene, he's also saying like, I don't remember the exact lines, but Luke is trying to raise the X-Wing out of the swamp with the Force. And he says, it's too big, I can't do it. And Yoda says, size matters not, which is another way of saying like, no, you think it's too big, and so it's too big for you. But too big is a thought. Same with like in the Matrix, there is no spoon, right? Like just because you think of something, it makes your reality that. We like those because they reinforce this same myth of like, you can just make your life be whatever you want it to be. Just think, I am going to be happy now, and you will be happy now. And again, we like that because it is often useful to think and do things in that way. It does, smile and you do start to feel happier. Not 100% of the time and not all of the way, but it does work. You do these little incremental things. For me, one of the mantras that I use for myself and that I give to other people is act like you'll be here tomorrow. Just because you can't accomplish it today doesn't mean you can't accomplish it. And if you are acting like accomplishing it today is success and failing to accomplish it today is failure, and that's permanent, then you're going to try and do everything all at once, which means you're really not going to do much of anything, because most things can't be done in a day. But if you know you're going to be here tomorrow, you can do a little bit of it and then do a little bit more later. And that makes things manageable. Your friend that you're referring to, in a sense, he's trying to do everything right now. And his efforts to do everything right now deplete his resources so that he's not even doing as much as he could be doing if he slowed down and took a step back and spread things out more. Act like you'll be here tomorrow. This doesn't need to happen all at once. Thinking is where things can happen all at once. You can think, what about this? Oh, then that. And it happens immediately. Execution is not like that. You're going to get bored and frustrated and impatient. You're going to feel like a failure. You're going to think, why am I not doing the things that I'm supposed to be able to do? It's just because you're thinking that it's going to go the way you think it will go. But if you think it'll go like this, and in reality it goes like this, your thoughts were the ones that were wrong. Reality didn't happen wrong. Your thoughts were wrong. Think you're capable of doing X, Y, and Z. Try to do it over and over and over and over. It doesn't happen. At what point do you question, maybe I'm wrong about what I'm capable of? Which, that's when we swoop in and talk about, well, let's investigate what you even mean by capability. Anyway, I really gotta go. It's gonna be with you all. I will be back next week, hopefully with Olivia. Same time, Monday, 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all. Be well.